Thank you for joining us for this episode of Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories. I am your host, Allison Preisinger-Higgins. Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories is a podcast exploring society, culture, and current events through conversation. We aspire to create an open, respectful, and equitable space where guests may feel free to share their truth and lived experiences. Our core values are rooted in community, connection, and personal development. Stories help us learn, relate, and grow. We are here to listen, to take notice. Thank you for being with us. I would like to show gratitude to the traditional ancestral land of the Puyallup people past and present on which this episode was created. I encourage listeners to research the land on which you live and are listening right now. Recognizing this is just the beginning. The more you explore, challenge, and learn, the more questions may arise, but this is how we grow and connect. Happy Thanksgiving week for all of you who celebrate in the States, whether it's having a meal around a table with your family and friends, whether it's just filling your world with more gratitude than normal, or however you celebrate. I hope it's a great week and a great long weekend for you. And as a part of the holiday, we're just going to do a replay today for our episode. We'll be replaying an episode that we released a couple of years ago now. So towards the end of the second season, or I guess it's been a year and a half. So towards the end of the second season of Take Notice with Gahrey Ovalle. So I'd love for you to hear this episode if you haven't already, or just rehear it because it's full of great inspirational ideas and stories from Gahrey on his experience being an activist from a young age. So, and as a part of doing this replay, I would like to reintroduce myself for anybody who may not be as familiar with me, your host of Take Notice. So, my name's Allison. Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories was created with the intent to connect, provide resources, and inspire personal growth. So I grew up in predominantly rural areas of Western Washington State in the United States, and it wasn't until I had the opportunity to attend Berklee College of Music in Boston, where I participated in conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that I began to learn how much I didn't know about the lived experiences of people of color in our country and around the world. I am continually learning, always learning, never going to know it all, of course, for anything, especially not this topic. And there were, of course, the moments and instructions in grade school, high school, books that I read and everything where I had the introduction when I was younger. But the education on these topics of racism and equity, inclusion, all the things that encompass this vast subject deepened a few years later after I graduated from college, when I met my now husband, and we began having discussions. He has a different upbringing than myself. He grew up in the South Seattle area, which is, or was, predominantly Black at the time. It's been definitely gentrified since then. Since we met, we had conversations about the many times he was mistreated in school, harassed by authorities because of the color of his skin. And we've also encountered situations that I had never been in before as a mixed race couple. So I soon began to see it from my own perspective in relation to us being together, walking down the street in a rural area or crossing the border into Canada. We have some stories, but not in any kind of comparison to what he's gone through himself and what all of my guests have gone through themselves in regards to these situations. So being exposed to these topics more and to somebody else's lived experience more, I began to seek out other ways to educate myself and get more involved. And eventually I got curious about the ways that the conversations that my husband and I had all the time could maybe impact others. So the potential for change can come from just one person's story, whether it's a shared experience or unfamiliar to them. And so the idea of a podcast came to mind. And a few years later, it was begun. So there's a couple episodes where I interview my husband, Darius Higgins, And so if you haven't heard those, you can listen in on those and hear his story. And I would encourage you, if you're interested and have enjoyed this season of episodes, the most recent one since the September of 2023, to go back and listen to more of the episodes if you haven't heard them, because everybody's story is so impactful and so different and interesting and unique. And it's so interesting to hear everybody's background. I am always just endlessly curious about people's upbringings and what twists and turns brought them here or there, and every experience talking to one of my guests is a new one, and I'm very grateful for each one and for everybody that's been a part of Take Notice. So check out the episodes if you haven't heard them all. My conversation with Gahrey Ovalle is the one that you'll hear replayed today in this episode. And this conversation turned out to be one of the more inspirational that we've had in terms of being active in the community and growing personally. Gahrey Ovalle shares about growing up, traveling to visit family rooted all over the world, being a part of community activism as a family from a young age, and what he's doing now to inspire others into action. Gahrey encourages everyone to grow forward and give back, finding purpose in service of others. So he is a successful entrepreneur and social activist. Gahrey has strived to heal and strengthen Black and Brown communities for almost 25 years. He has a book called Unjustified, and it's a bestseller. In that book, he provides insights so that many more are able to find their own success for themselves, their families, and their communities. He encourages people to say less and do more because conversation is good, but action is gold. So please enjoy this replay of my conversation with Gahrey Ovalle. Gahrey, thanks for joining me on Take Notice. You're over in New York where it's starting to get chilly again, unfortunately. So how are you today?
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate it. I am great, right? The weather's starting to turn. We're starting to see a lot more activity. So I'm always happy for it, right? The clocks have changed. We're getting more daylight during the daytime. I love any and all of that. I'm just so appreciative, right? It's the little things that I'm always grateful for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're in New York. What part of New York do you live in?
I'm out in Long Island.
Oh, okay. Okay. Did you grow up there or?
I did. Born and raised out here. Spent all my life out here. Thankfully, though, I got into traveling internationally early in my life. So I think somewhere around like that 7, 8 years old, I was traveling by myself internationally.
Oh, wow.
Going to visit family in the Caribbean, in Europe. So I had a chance to see what that looked like. But yeah, born and raised out here. So I had a chance to see a lot of it. And because I traveled early, I had a chance to kind of see what that looked like compared to other places in the world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And what makes it a lot of fun also is that I guess in these spaces, my family was encouraged to learn so many languages and kind of visit so many other parts of the world. So when we get together, this thing is like a United Nations meeting. The conversation starts in English, it jumps to Spanish, somebody pulls out Dutch, somebody's moving into German, somebody wants to be fancy and bring out French and Italian, back to English because mostly everybody at the table speaks English. Like such a beautiful, beautiful way. And then on top of that, just the shapes and the sizes, right? Like my family, they're Black, they're Spanish, they're white. So I get to see all of it, right? And I had a chance to grow up with all of that. So it really, really helped determine and shape, who and what I am, but also just the experiences, that I've had along the way.
Ah, that sounds amazing. Wow. Who did you grow up surrounded by in New York, in Long Island? Parents, siblings?
Yeah, my mother and father both migrated here in the 60s. They quickly naturalized and then they started their family here in the United States. And it was just us, right? All the rest of our family was in the Caribbean somewhere, was in Europe somewhere. So it was just, the five of us, kind of just, the six of us, right? Just hanging out and kind of growing up, which was also a little scary, right? Because you don't exactly have anyone to lean on immediately, especially inside of your family. And what that meant for us was we really had to dive into the community aspect, in the places that we lived, forming unbelievable bonds of community and friendship. And this is where I quickly learned as a young person, family is not just blood related. It's so much deeper than that. Now, I didn't understand that until I was older, but I had a chance to see that as a young person. And I said, oh man, my family can be anything that I'd like it to be, and I can fill it with as many beautiful human beings as I'd like. As I got older, it made complete sense. But it really did help transform how we operated and kind of moved along in New York, especially.
Wow. Yeah. In what ways did your family do that when you were younger? That you remember?
My mother was an activist during her heyday, right?
Okay.
So she was really into community activism, galvanizing the community for simple things like just cleanup projects and other more important things like, hey, there's a gang violence problem here. There's a drug, problem here. Let's clean these things up. Let's beautify our town. Let's make it safe for our children. And in that way, I had a chance to see her create relationships with local members of the community, the schools, law enforcement, local government agencies. And she started to become a liaison between the community and all these other spaces as well for everyone. And what it allowed to happen was the community got safer, it got friendlier, we grew closer, and everything got better, right? The relationships, especially between the community and law enforcement, when I think about it, right? Like we look at the times now and it feels like we are at total odds with each other. I remember growing up in an environment where they were totally welcomed. And there was a community policing model that existed that my mother helped create in our township. And that helped really spark, what the environment that I grew up around, and reaching out and extending our family and friends into all these other individuals. That's kind of really what it was. We dove into the idea that if we're going to be here in this country, make the most of it and dive into it. And as such, we were able to create some amazing relationships, especially with a lot of members from law enforcement as well. And it created the most beautiful environment here, that we grew up in. And it really made the difference, right? As I started to grow up into the world, I just recognized that things don't have to be how we're told they have to be. We absolutely have the ability to change that right where we are. And we don't have to be very big and powerful. Like my mother is a little tiny, tiny woman, and she managed to get everybody up and moving and doing what they needed to do to create a better environment for everyone, right? Like obviously she wanted to create a safe space for her children to grow up, but she recognized in order to do that, she had to create a safe space for everyone's children to grow up. Yeah. And in that space, we leaned into it. I have friends that call me regularly, friends of the family, that we consider them family. And this is now 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, right? And it was still very, very tight knit. And they've all moved, not all of them still stayed here in New York. They've moved into other parts of the United States, moved into other parts of other countries. And we still managed to stay pretty close. And it just speaks to how strong those bonds were, when I was younger.
Wow. It sounds like your mother was completely inspiring in
tremendous.
Many ways, and on you as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. If I had to pick, that individual who had the most influence, usually it's always a parent, but in this particular case, my mother was just a cut above and beyond the rest, right?
Wow.
Like she didn't just help us, right? She helped everyone. And in doing so, she created models that everyone was able to look at, right? Like I can still walk through our community with my mother and total strangers to me will come up and say, hey, mom, because that's the kind of woman she was, right? Wow. It was just such a beautiful, beautiful time. And it's even more beautiful now that we get a chance to see it because she's much older now. She's so many decades removed from that kind of work. And the impact that she left, you still see it when these individuals approach her and speak to her. It's absolutely beautiful.
Wow. What did your father do when you were growing up?
He was working his tail off is what he was doing.
Yeah. Sounds like both of them were. Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you must, right? Especially in New York. New York is a very, very expensive state.
Oh,
They don't
yeah.
play around over here, right? So
Yeah.
someone has to pay the bills,
Hmm.
and that went on for a while until obviously until eventually they divorced, and then that was the end of that.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
he was also very, very active in that community activism as well, right?
Hmm.
So he took a major role in the growth of that as well, and he also, right, tremendous influence for so many individuals. They also recognize his contribution in their life. And they are, they're grown individuals. They've had their families. They've raised their families. They're helping raise their grandchildren. And they'll still, communicate and speak to me about how influential my parents were in their lives, even today.
Mm.
Just
Wow.
it's absolutely amazing and inspiring. And it just lets me know that that's how powerful we all are. And if I choose, I can do that, not just for myself and my family, but for the community as well. And that's the path that I have chosen, right? I continue to operate in those spaces.
Yeah, yeah. And so when you were growing up, what kinds of interests and things did you get into? Did you follow along when your parents would go to events and things, or were you into other stuff and then kind of came around to it later on, or how did that go for you?
Yeah, no, I was knee deep involved right away.
Yeah.
I had to be a 6, 7, 8-year-old child in these spaces. As they were out there, let's say protesting something, I would be the child handing out coffee and hot chocolate
Oh,
to all
nice.
the adults, that
Hmm.
are kind of doing their thing. I got to show up at all of these private panels and these events and these conversations that were happening between local government officials, police, the local police department, and our community. I got to show up to these events and kind of just sit quietly and listen and learn and hear, some of the concerns of community members. Now, again, as a child, I really didn't understand a lot of it. As I got older, though, I was quickly able to see the sense of it, how it was important, why it was important, and why it is, individuals need to step into these spaces. Oftentimes, these are the conversations that we don't have, but create the biggest impact for us if we're willing to engage in them.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a unique experience to be able to learn that early how those types of things work and kind of seeing maybe not the back end of things, but like how the community can be involved and how the process works, at least to get heard and all those things. So were your siblings there as well? Did they all get into it as well, or what were they up to?
Yeah, it was a family affair.
Yeah, I imagine.
It definitely was,
Yeah.
Now, we were all tremendous athletes as well, right? So we
Okay.
spent a lot of time on the field of play. But outside of that, we came right to the field of activism, right?
Yeah.
Right at the community level. And we did. We were there. We were active. We participated in any and every way that allowed my parents to be successful, right? In the spaces that they were. When they wanted to move into like youth development type opportunities, again, we were right there. We were spearhead a lot of that. And as such, we created amazing relationships with other members in our community. Years later, we still run into these individuals and they tell us exactly how important and impactful that was for them in their life. But we did. We all had a chance to get involved and take part. And at the end of the day, especially for me, I know it did the same for my siblings, but it left an indelible mark. There's no way to unlearn that. Once you do, it's like reading. I dare you to unlearn how to read, right? It's
Hmm.
like how can you do that?
Right.
And for me, it was as soon as I saw these things and I was able to get to the point where I could understand them, those two things connected immediately. And I recognized that was something I wanted to continue throughout my entire life. So I took that same model and I applied it in high school, in college, in my workplaces, raising a family, these later years, now that I'm approaching retirement and giving back to community even more. Like I continue to do all of these things because I recognize just how important it was, and having the chance to see it early, just unbelievable how important and how special that is,
Hmm.
for a young person to understand that, apply it, because it's not about really changing your life. It's about helping so many others. And in that space, what a beautiful space to occupy, right?
Hmm.
Like me, I find my greatest joy when I am in the service of others. And that's where my passion is. And that's where my happiness is. And There's no feeling like that in the world, right? Like, I don't want you to give me anything. Just tell me how it is I can serve you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so excited to leave the space with that. And oftentimes I run into some conflict with others because they're like, you do so much. How can we kind of pay that back in return? And for me, it's go show somebody else, right? Go pass that
Sure.
along.
Mm-hmm.
We grow forward and give back. And I don't have to be the recipient in those spaces. And I prefer not to be the recipient in those spaces. So I always encourage people, listen, the blessings and the beauty that I have shared with you, please go share that with someone else so they know it's possible and doable. And this is how we kind of spread love in our communities instead of just talking about it or wishing for it.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful, and such a wonderful perspective to approach things with. I appreciate that a lot. That's wonderful. So when you were taking what you learned from your parents and those experiences onward from high school, what did that look like for you? What was that journey? Did you go off to college? Did you go straight to work? What did you do next?
Yeah, for me it was college bound. So I went to college again. In my family, we were all tremendous athletes. So all of us went to school on full rides,
What sports
playing
did you all
ball.
do?
For me, it was football, right? Football
Okay.
and baseball, but I concentrated in football.
Mm-hmm.
My brother was baseball. My sister, she was softball. Just like
Wow.
we were all athletes, and we were able to go to school that way,
Awesome.
and it paid for our schooling as well. So thankfully, right? But I jumped into those spaces. And immediately, I continue to apply the same lessons. And what I quickly recognized was, hey, I have the ability to create community in brand new spaces, right? It wasn't just the space I grew up in. I
Mm.
could take these same lessons and apply them in other spaces, make friends with new people, and create brand new community where I am. And that's where I learned, my goodness, this thing is replicable. You can do this anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can do this. So I would share that with others. And just like that, Sundays became a dinner for myself and my friends. We would start to cook. And, college kids don't cook, right?
Yeah.
I knew how to cook when I went to school. So I took it upon myself. I shared with others. And before you know it, other individuals who knew how would come and say, hey, I'd like to cook this week. Or I'd
Mm.
like to help cook this week. And before you know it, we have this beautiful environment, and we're doing that on Sundays. And then it breaks into 2 days a week and now 3 days a week. And before you know it, we're breaking bread regularly with individuals in our community, in our college. And it's just allowing us to grow closer. And again, those same relationships. I know these individuals now for decades. We're still close because we managed to find space to grow close with one another when we were younger. Doing it there, I met my wife, right? We're college sweethearts.
Mm.
So it was wonderful. I had a chance to meet her. And in those spaces, look, I was always serious. I was always trending upwards in terms of maturity, right?
Mm.
So I recognized, man, she's kind of a keeper, right? Let me find out if we're on the same page. So
Mhm.
I'd ask a bunch of questions, what do you think about family? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I started to quickly realize, man, that we have a lot in common. And that's outside of just liking each other, right? We have a lot
Mhm.
in common in terms of where we would like to see our future go. And that's exactly what we did, right? We quickly agreed, hey, let's get married. Let's start a family early. Let's retire early, and let's enjoy our life that way. And
Wow.
that is exactly how that thing transpired. And in every step of those spaces, I kept applying those same lessons that I learned from my youth, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Give often, and after you finish, give more.
Hmm.
And it's really simple, right? And in those spaces, everyone benefits. Everyone benefits.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. That's remarkable. You're able to have that foresight that early on in college. Not, yeah, you're right. Not a lot, it's a minority maybe that are able to do that
It
that
definitely
age.
different. Man, the funny thing is, as serious as we were trying to have the conversation, what does an 18 or a 19, 20-year-old know about marriage and having a family and retirement. And what do you really know about that at that age?
Yeah.
You hope for the best,
Right.
but it's mostly wishful thinking, right?
You're just figuring it out as you go still, but but to think that through, that's awesome.
Yeah. So it's pretty good.
What does your wife do?
Currently, she was in like State Farm, like the insurance space for a while.
Yeah.
She moved into the IRS space now. I want her to just retire. I want someone to hang out with. I don't want her to be done with it. Yeah. But she's very driven in her own space, and I support her in all things in all ways, right? So if that's what she would like to do, wonderful. But I've asked her a few times already, right? I think I was 27 the first time I asked her, like, hey, we're doing pretty well. Why don't we go do this somewhere else, kind of get out of here. And she was like, I don't know. I said, all right, I'll ask you again. I think somewhere in our early 30s, I asked her again, and she was like, well, the kids are getting ready to go to school. I'm not so sure, and I'm just getting back to work now, and I kind of like it. I said, all right, I'm here to support you, whatever you want to do. Mm-hmm. At this point, I'm like, listen, we did a lot now. Right? We got a lot of time behind us. How about we stop playing games and go enjoy the remainder of our life, right? Like we just celebrated 25 years.
Congratulations.
So we've been doing this a while, and we've been doing it here for a while. So why not change our scenery or something, right?
Yeah.
We were empty nesters for a while, which was fantastic until COVID brought everyone home. Right?
Okay.
And then it brought our children home, and that was that. And I imagine, and for us, it's like we love it because we haven't had this dynamic, everyone in the house, since they were younger, before they went off to college. So we love the fact that everyone's home. We love the fact that we can have family dinners again and hang out and watch, a movie together on the couch and all that good stuff. But we know that's also short-lived, right? Eventually, the world is starting to open back up again. Our children are very, very ambitious and successful. They're going to continue to move on in their directions. And at this point, hey, it's just going to be me and you again. How about it? Right?
Yeah.
So I'm hoping this time I'm going to convince her to come.
Yeah, there you go. And you're saying, I think it was before we got on here, you're saying maybe the Caribbean. Is that what's in your brain?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have a place out in the Dominican Republic now. I think I'd like to pick up something in one of the other islands that's outside of the hurricane belt, like Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao. I'll probably pick up something around there.
Okay.
And then just hang out, right? Just enjoy our time. We have the ability to kind of, have a base of operations here in New York and another base in the Caribbean. And I also have family in Europe, in Holland. So we hang out over there as well. That's a pretty good way. That's a pretty good way. And do that for a couple of years and then figure out what we would like to do. Mm-hmm. Listen, we work so hard, especially in this country, right? It's not just New York. It's so expensive, right?
Yeah.
We work so hard for what we have, for the life we have, for the life we built. At some point, you have to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. So often people get to that point in their life where they turn back and they finally reflect on things. And oftentimes they're just a little past their prime where they can really take advantage and enjoy that time and space.
Yeah.
They're a little further into their twilight than they would like to be. Mm-hmm. And I always encourage people, hey, live your life, work as hard as you can. It takes about 20 years to secure your financial security. But even in that time, find space for yourself. Right? Don't grow your business or your finances at the expense of yourself. Don't do it. Yeah. So I always encourage people to remember, stop, smell the roses, take some time, take a sabbatical, right? I put my wife on sabbatical twice since we've been married.
Oh, nice.
And that's because she deserved it. She needed it. She wanted it. And we almost feel guilty by taking time off. And that was one of the things I had to tell her, look, we're going to table that. We're going to stop that right now. Mm-hmm. You are not going to feel guilty about taking time off. You are going to take this time and enjoy it. You're going to do whatever you want with it. And if I'm there to enjoy it, great. If I'm not, you better still enjoy it, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, this is time for you to find and heal you. So take the time to do so. I encourage that often and always. So, even in all my spaces, I've worked way harder than I should have in moments, but ultimately I was able to learn those lessons where you really do have to take the time, because to build your businesses at the expense of yourself, to ignore your health because you're pursuing, finances or capital or something like, very short-sighted, and
Mhm.
it usually doesn't pan out how you want it to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Your family's also from Holland. I visited there a few years ago, and when I was there, I have a friend that lives there, and when I was there, I noticed that a lot of the billboards and a lot of the messaging was kind of what you're like, much more geared towards taking time, vacationing, having that balance than anything I've ever seen out here. So
Mhm.
it's interesting. It's different mindset and different awareness that is beyond where we're at in the States, at least right now. Maybe it's
Yeah.
shifting, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, no.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's definitely shifting. I definitely see that conversation happening. More and more people are concerned about their health and their well-being, right? You just start to see certain language that's more mainstream now in terms of, what self-care and things of that nature. So
Mhm.
it's definitely shifting in that direction. But again, like I had mentioned earlier, being able to travel into those spaces early on in life, I was able to hear that and see
Right.
that. And then I was able to look back and say, wait a minute, that's not exactly the message that I grew up with or the
Yeah.
messaging that I've heard all school year long, before I jump in the summer over somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's when I was really able to kind of put them up against each other and start to dissect them. What makes sense, what's right, what's not right, what are the things that I want to carry on, when it's my turn. And I quickly recognized, that taking care of self, that was just a priority. And you're right, in other parts of the world, and especially in Holland, they demand it. They refuse to let you work weekends. They refuse to let you work through your holiday. They demand that you take it because they know that's what's required for you to be your best self, your healthiest self. It makes perfect sense when you're into personal development and when you're into, health and nutrition. But when that's not normal and natural, it almost feels like you're talking another language. It's almost like
Right.
sacrilegious to tell someone to take off a day or don't work this weekend or something like
Mhm.
it's insane the amount of pressure that we put on ourselves here.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for what payoff? Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Nothing really worth it. Right? The only real metric is health. That's
Mhm.
the only real metric because without it, you come to the reality real fast. I guess all those other things weren't as important as I thought they were.
Mhm.
Right? Health
Yeah.
will quickly have you realize the things that matter in life and the things that maybe don't matter as much in
Mhm. Yeah,
life.
absolutely. Can you describe a bit of your work and what you do? I've asked you about everybody else, and then now I I need to get to you.
That's right. So me, I've been in the entrepreneur space, that business owner space since college, right? Since I realized I wanted to get married early and my wife and I realized we wanted to have a family early, I recognized quickly I could not work for others because I didn't want to miss a minute. I didn't want to miss anything, right? Especially when you're raising children, that time goes by so fast. And once it's gone, it is gone forever.
Mhm.
And in that way, I recognized I needed to control my calendar, right? I knew that about time. Maybe I didn't understand all the other things, but I knew I needed to control that much of it. So I jumped into entrepreneurship, construction space.
Mm.
I went from there into the renewable energy space. And, currently I still have a renewable energy company,
Oh, okay.
working out here in New York. We do a lot of work on the East Coast as well as in the Caribbean. But from there, what I've always been doing and behind the scenes was coaching and mentoring other business owners, how to build and grow and expand and all these other spaces. And what I recognize now, and this is when my children got into college, I was able to finally sit back and sit down, right? Because my time and energy had come back to me. I'm no longer running behind my children for whatever it is they're doing, all their activities.
Mhm.
And I had a chance to reflect, right? And it's in those internal moments of introspection where you really start to recognize the things that are of value and important. And what I recognize is that I had an amazing run, both personally and professionally. And I had wondered, why aren't others having the same experience? Now, clearly, there are a lot of simple reasons why, right? A couple obvious ones.
Mhm.
But ultimately, um, it's just the opportunity. It's just being in the influence of others, right? Being close to proximity. others who have had experience or can teach you something. So if individuals had the opportunity to have the information and then apply the information that makes their personal life better, their professional life better, allows them to be successful in their entrepreneurial space, that journey, imagine the life that they're going to have and all the lives that they're going to impact. And that's when I told myself, I looked back and I said, all right, what if I'm able to then create a curriculum or conversations or write books in that space? And that's when I realized, okay, I'm starting to realize what I want to do moving forward, right? I'm looking inward and my answers are showing me what it's looking like forward outside for my future and for the futures of others. And it's in that space that I quickly recognized, all right, I have all these skill sets. I'm happy to have them. I'm happy to share them. Now let's do it in a way where I can just reach more and impact the lives of others. I've always done this in my life, giving back to my community, giving back to other members, mentoring, tutoring, coaching at the youth sport level, business level, wherever it is. I help where I can. Here is where I recognized I have the ability to be even more impactful to more individuals by creating something that they can apply in their life and then showing up and supporting them as they're moving through that. And ultimately, and I had mentioned this earlier, right? Growing forward, giving back. That's the model that we all have to exemplify in our life. We have to be able to be successful in our own personal space, our professional space. And we have to be able to share that information with others so that they can experience that same joy of success, because it's going to benefit them as well as us, right? It's not like there's only one pool here and it's zero sum. There's enough for everybody. Mm-hmm. We just have to show and share, right? The only thing that we're lacking in this entire planet is sharing and caring. The only things that are lacking, everything else is in abundance. It doesn't matter what the narrative tells you. Mm-hmm. And in that space, I said, all right, here's another opportunity in which I can give back even more. Just become a lifeline for my community, for others. And that's what I did. I moved into the coaching, the mentoring space for business leaders. I've been crafting and creating course content for them and materials that allow them to expand and grow and build their businesses. Because at the end of the day, we all want to help. And I think most people are in the space where they want to help others, but they're not in a position where they can do so. Financially, they're just kind of making it. Or they're doing well, but not well enough to go help someone else. They have their own situation under control. Mm-hmm. And this is where I always encourage and implore business owners, don't just make some money, make all of the money, all of it, everything that you could possibly make, because it's at that level that you're going to be able to have the impact that you want to have. Most business owners, they want to grow their business and be successful, take care of their family, and help others. But they struggle in that part of helping others because they're just not quite big enough or robust enough or have enough. And here is where I want to show you, get to that 6 and 7 figure level. Let me show you how to get to multiple 7 figures. Now imagine all the good that you can do for others when you are operating from that space.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's fantastic. That's a big point in that I can think of, as you're describing that, I can think of multiple people who are at the different levels that you're describing, of just trying to get by, of just making enough to get themselves supported, but not being able to do that next step. And also the folks that are able to do that next step of helping and giving back. So sometimes there seems to be this block of like, how do we get to the next spot? Or not even considering that they can. Sometimes maybe that's even the block. So
that's tremendous. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes people they don't grow up with the example in their life.
Right.
And they don't realize that they have every ability to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes when I have these conversations, sometimes we're unlocking permission, right? It's
right.
The individuals, they're totally gung-ho about it. They want to do it, but there's some type of reservation or limitation. And it's usually something that was handed down to them, mm-hmm. A limiting viewpoint or something like that, a parent or elder in their life at some point kind of shared with them. They're holding on to it like it's their own viewpoint, and it stops them from growing in their own space. And oftentimes we remove that so that they can give themselves permission to grow into the beautiful human being that they were always meant to be. And in that space, my good, watch out. When someone recognizes that they are completely powerful, that they have every ability to do what they want in their life and then some, that is such a beautiful space for the individuals who recognize that and then lean into the application of it. Amazing the results.
Yeah, I bet. And what a rewarding space for you to be in, to be able to help kind of try to guide people to that spot. That's remarkable.
Yeah, that's where I find my joy, right?
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Oftentimes it's full of so many little T's and big T's, right? And we're talking about trauma at this point. And so many things happen in our lifetime going through, and we're holding on to these things decades later in the same capacity in which we originally experienced it. Even though we're so much more mature and so much more capable and so much more whatever else, we're still feeling exactly as we were in that moment when we first experienced it. We have the ability to rewrite that. And once you do, that same pain that used to hold you or trip you or just bother you, impede you, that same pain gets viewed differently. And you recognize that you have every ability to move past it now. It doesn't have to hold you or own you or dictate your future. You're allowed to go back into your past, review that situation, rewrite your understanding of it, and come back to your future and apply it. So this way you now no longer feel handcuffed the same way from that former trauma. And now you can move forward in such a much more powerful way and a more impactful and intentional way. Growth is intentional. And when we decide to intentionally maximize our growth, we have no choice but to go back, address those things in our past, fix them and correct them. And that allows us to really move forward. And I always encourage, my clients, my friends, my students, just anyone I speak to, spend time in that space. It will do you well in so many different ways, not just professionally, but also personally. And in all the areas, right? Health, wealth, relationships, all the major areas in one life. If you can go ahead and rewrite some of those limiting factors, you will transform your future as you continue to build forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, a lot of it is unlearning so much stuff. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
I think unlearning is one of the biggest skills we can learn.
Right.
I remember when my children were going to school, and this is, elementary school, junior high school, they would go to school, they would learn their lesson, they would come home, and the first thing was, all right, kids, what'd you learn in school? They would go ahead and repeat it, and I say, okay, now we're going to move into the unlearning of what you learned in school. Because usually so much of it was just backwards or out of place or not quite right, or just an outright, hey, this, I can't even believe they're still peddling this stuff, right? At that point, let's address these things. Let's break them down, show you how to do it better or easier or more efficiently. Now I'm going to teach you to give it back and regurgitate it the way your teacher wants it. And now you're going to go back to school knowing how to do this thing properly or the truth behind something, as well as how to give the teacher back the answer so you can get 100 on your test. Because at the end of the day, we have a high bar in our household and we demand that our children meet it. Right. So academically, we demanded that they were excellent. And sure enough, they were. But that takes time. Right. It's not just something you demand of another and you sit back and watch it happen. You have to do the work as well. But that period of unlearning, absolutely critical for their growth and understanding as they move forward in life. So they didn't just take everything that they heard at face value. They actually started to dive in. And now that they are adults at their own level, they're very cautious, and discerning about the people that they spend time with and the information that they consume.
Yeah, that's an amazing approach to going through that with your children, and while recognizing that a lot of the systemic educational, textbooks or whatever it is, and ways of teaching kind of misses some stuff. So to have that seems like a great foundation for them to move forward. And like you said, to be able to have a better sense of truth or what they believe or not. That sounds very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
It certainly was. And to watch them now, their growth, I watched the trajectory of their growth now.
Mhm.
And one, as a parent, you're always proud of your children, right? But even stepping outside of that, kind of viewing them outside of, just they're my children, they're my family. I recognize that they are just doing so many of the right things in their own life, and their timing is right, and their choices are better, right? As a, it's always good, better, best. Their choices are usually in that better space. And that's all you want for young people, right? Because you want them to go enjoy their experience in life, but you want them to have success as they do so. And sitting back and watching their choices, the choices they make now, I know that we spent a lot of time working on the little things, and you can start to see how it plays out now as it's their turn to make choices for their life as well as for others.
Yeah, that's wonderful. What are some examples of what you would go over with them, maybe in their high school level? Do you remember anything specific from that time?
Yeah. So I am a not just a really good athlete in my heyday, right? But I was an outstanding academic.
Mhm.
So the bar was always set high academically. So they would come home, mathematics, physics, sciences, any and all of those things. I'd come back and I'd say, all right, this work is pretty good. It's kind of, high school level, no problem, easy enough. I just don't like the way in which they're teaching you. Some of the methods that they teach to do mathematics now are so oversimplified. It's actually a little too oversimplified.
Mm.
They compare some of these lessons to other things in life that don't necessarily have anything to do with math. They try to break things down into groups and extrapolate and guesstimate on certain answers, then get back to the work and try to find the answer. I said, this is the long way around to try to get the answer to many of these problems. Let me just show you quickly how to do long mathematics, which they no longer do in school anymore, apparently. Absolutely insane. So in some of those spaces, easy and obvious, right? As an engineer, I can quickly, run through the mathematic or the science portion of things. History was another one, just coming back with the history books, what it is they're teaching, the importance of certain things, recognizing, man, that's not quite right. Some of these lessons about American history, right? And racism in America, slavery in America, certain genocides that took place here in this country, on this continent. Some of that information is almost like whitewashed or gone over, or all of a sudden it's like a sound bite snippet of what really happened. I'm like, wait, where's the context to all of this?
Yeah.
So we would dive into those things, and I had them reading so much college level coursework in their high school days so that they could understand the bigger picture of the lessons that they were learning at the high school level. So again, like that's where I applied it. I had no problem giving my children more. And in this point in time, they're finally adults and they lean into that, right? When it's time to do things, they always lean into doing more. When it's time to share, they lean into more because they recognize you don't have to be scared of the hard work. It's actually a benefit. It's going to benefit you plenty and those around you even more so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So Take Notice, the podcast mission is all about community connection and personal development. So what's one action that you would suggest people take to start or continue their journey of personal development in general, or personal development involving issues of racism?
I love this question, by the way. I absolutely love it. First time I read it, I stopped at personal development because I'm super excited about personal development, right? I know that is the answer to all things. It makes no difference what your problem is. If you look internally, you will find your answer to all of your external problems every single time. And then when I read the rest of the question, I was like, ooh, racism, another good one, right? So I was like, I love this conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and let's address the racism part first, right? Because that's the question in its whole. When we're talking about issues of racism and what individuals can do, right? What actions can they take to start or continue their journey? In this space here, I think there's a simple rule. Stop supporting those things and people that do not support you. Very simple. At some point in time, we have to stop tolerating injustice. in our space, in our actions, in our choices, the things that we buy, the people we support. We have to stop supporting those things that, one, don't support us, and two, are clearly in direct opposition, to creating betterment for humanity, right? Because when we're talking about ending racism, that's an issue of humanity. That's a much larger issue. It's not just, affecting you and your community. It's affecting everyone everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And in that space, we have to stop supporting those people, those conversations, those political parties, those candidates, the people in our family, right? We have to stop tolerating injustice wherever we are. And what that means is at the dinner table, in the pews of your church, on the sidelines of youth sports, at family get-togethers, when you're choosing your partner. Refuse to accept those individuals and those parts of individuals that stand completely against that which you believe, that which you hold dear and true to you. Now, when I say stop supporting those things that don't support you, I'm not saying it in a selfish way, right? I'm not saying it so you can be a mean, stingy jerk of a person. And I think that's not what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about identifying the ways in which you contribute to the things you don't want to see. When we recognize, hey, and this is for me personal, right? And personally, I recognize factory farming was one of those things that aren't just killing, my local economy or, people inside of my local community. It's killing everyone across the planet.
Mm.
Factory farming, that thing is just wiping out so many resources and creating so much pollution. How is it that I can stop supporting that? Clearly, I can't end it on my own, but what can I do to stop supporting that? And somewhere almost 20 years ago, I started to recognize, I'm going to start to consume things a little differently. I'm going to start to eat a little differently. And in doing so, I slowly stopped supporting those industries that I recognize will create some of the worst agitators and instigators of pollution on our planet. Politically, I want to make sure that I'm not supporting individuals or helping individuals get elected who are clearly at odds with other members of our community, who are clearly bigoted or biased or racist or something of that nature, sexist, misogynist. Like, I have no desire, no time for that. And in that way, I just refuse to tolerate it. What I recognize that I need to root it out where it stands, and I need to root it out where I stand. So if I start to take this approach of not supporting those things that don't support me, and I implement those actions in my own space, I now have the ability to reverberate that outwards. And in doing so, others are going to see it. They're going to feel it, hear it, understand it, and they're going to join hands. And they're going to oftentimes recognize that they have that same ability in their own space. So I would recognize immediately, just like I said, stop supporting those things and people that don't support you. In that space, that's where you could probably have the greatest amount of impact in your own personal life, in the lives of everyone that is looking up to you and at you as an example. And for those individuals that have been in your space choosing to do things that you don't support, they're going to recognize, hey, you no longer support that. I need to be careful now. Because people will not overstep your boundary if they know there's one there. They won't overstep it if they know you're going to protect it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a beautiful example. I am a feminist in all things, in all ways. And in that space, I refuse to tolerate locker room talk. I refuse to tolerate that kind of conversation or those things that degrade or denigrate women, those conversations that create spaces where the biggest gaps can happen, especially when we're talking about like generational wealth, right? That's a thing that impacts, obviously, Black and brown people versus white people, but women versus men. Mm-hmm. And in that space, I just refuse to tolerate it. I make sure that in my businesses, I hire women. I pay them their rate and their worth. And I am the example which I want to see. When other men are in my space, they are very careful about the conversations they have. because they recognize I will check them in a heartbeat. I will check them. The same is true for you in your space. If others know that you will refuse to tolerate their injustice, they will stop sharing it in your space. So there's one, right? Personal development, issue of racism.
Mm-hmm.
When I heard, though, like I said, I stopped originally at personal development, right? And when I think of that space, I'm just like, hey, this is where all the answers are, right? Every answer is rooted in personal development. Makes no difference what the problem is. And in that space, hey, commit to that. Commit to your own personal betterment. Watch how that shows up in all the spaces of your life. I said it earlier. Health, wealth, relationships. Those are the three majors that everybody's worried about. And if you are concentrating on your personal development, your health gets better, your wealth gets better, your relationships stay great. It's very simple because you're always working on yourself. And by looking at yourself, you now have the chance to clean up your own act, right? And then you get to share that better version of yourself with others, and the world falls in love with you. The world absolutely wants to support you in what it is you're doing because they recognize this thing is not just good for you personally, but it's good for them as well. And in that space, there's probably two things that people need to be desperately aware of, right? And in personal, this is now at a personal level when we're just talking about personal development.
Mm-hmm.
Too often we feel responsible for the plight of others, and we take on their stuff, their stress, their agita, their problems, their issues. We have to recognize that our calendar is full. And when we look at our calendar, it's often full of the wants and needs of others. We really have to commit to ourselves personally. And again, this is not in a selfish way. This is about becoming your best self so that you can help others become their best self. It's a very simple understanding. So if you will identify your commitment to yourself, you will start to see it expand into your professional and your personal space. And there are 5 spaces, there are 5 key areas for personal development that I tell people, just work in these spaces, right? My clients, my students, strangers, work in these areas and you will start to immediately see improvement, both personally and professionally. 1, sleep. Got to get your sleep in. 2, diet. You have to be aware of what you're consuming. It matters. What you put in is what you get out. Meditation. You need to spend time in thought. You need to be thinking about things in order to move towards resolution. It's not about just doing for the sake of doing. So take some time to think. The same way you clean your body, meditation cleans your mind. You need to do so. Movement is number 4. You got to have some kind of exercise. We will grow old really fast in this sedentary lifestyle that we have. Make sure you're moving. And then the last one, detox. Make sure that you are taking time to, even if you don't know what to put in your mouth or in your body or in your mind, put less things in there. Very simple, right? Like if you're not sure of what to do, just less is better. So take the time to do that in terms of your food. Take the time to do that in terms of your drink, in terms of the places that you are going, the people you are hanging out with, the content you are consuming, and above all else, digital detox is absolutely necessary nowadays. It's critical for our long-term growth because we spend way too much time in front of screens, way too much. And that thing slowly but surely kills us. And we need to be more active and intentional in our movements in that space.
Wow. Yeah. Wow to all of it. That's such a wonderful answer to that question.
Listen, I've been thinking about these things for a really long time. Yeah. I've been implementing them in my own life for, again, a really long time.
Yeah.
And now that I'm sharing a lot of this information with others, it's about the actionable items, right? These are the things the takeaways that you can take, implement immediately, and look at the result. Mm-hmm. Right. It's very simple. For me, it was always that simple. I have a very regimented mind. It's probably why I went into engineering. For me, things are just that simple. When I see something that works, do more of it. Mm-hmm. And when I see something that doesn't work, I got to stop doing that.
Sure.
Right. It's one of the reasons, I don't ever apologize, ever. Just ask my wife. Right? And the reason being is because I view the apology as the empty words that mean absolutely nothing. If I have to apologize, it's because I stepped out of line. I was doing something incorrectly. I did something wrong. Instead of apologizing, let me just correct that and make sure that never happens again. You will never have to address it again. Done over easy. Like, that's how I see things, and that's how I approach them. And in that way, we all have the ability to create ease and simplicity in our life. And if we're conscious of it and intentional about it, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. The easier we make things, the more impactful they can be. The easier we make things, the easier it is to share with others. So life is as simple or as complicated as we make it. I always suggest make it simple.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And it really reflects in how you describe your thoughts and the points that you are making. And just to go back just a little bit to the something that stuck out, maybe not the most, but a lot to me, was your point of basically boundaries in how you allow people to be around you and being specific and calling people out and not allowing that space, that in your space. It just made me think of another thought of like, if more people dedicate themselves to doing that in the different realms, there's less space for the damaging things and that people say and do. So if more and more people hold themselves to those standards and point things out and call people out for things, then it'll just exponentially improve spaces for people, which I think is what's missing.
That's absolutely right. I think most people get terrified when they think about the problems of the world. It seems so magnanimous, so large. Like, how can little old me do anything about all of that? Mm-hmm. Right? Like that, and it's a legitimate concern. And here's where we have to recognize our job is not to change the world. Your job is not to change the world. Your job is to change your world.
Right.
And in doing so, those who are immediately impacted by your world are going to notice. They're going to recognize. They're going to take note. They're going to use you as an example. They're going to continue to look up to you. They're going to mimic and model you. And before you know it, you have created another excellent version of yourself in someone else. Beautiful. And that's how we affect change in the world at a larger level. We can't change the world. We have to change our world. And in doing so, think of the overlapping ripple effects of a community who has dedicated themselves to doing that. All of these single individual entities creating better, expanding, just resonating that into the world, and the person next to them doing the exact same thing. My goodness, that's the space that we have to occupy. That's where we have to hold ourselves more accountable, because we have every ability to create this environment, every ability. We just have to be more intentional about the actual actions that we have to take, like not just talking, but action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Connected to this thought, I have another question for you. So regarding racism, social norms, stereotypes, or similar issues, what is a conversation that you believe should happen more often and openly? So actions are important, and then maybe to inspire those actions, what conversations should be happening more?
Yeah. So there are, my goodness, there's a litany of conversations. I wouldn't say that any one is super more important than the other, but, in terms of the hierarchy, but all of them need to be had. And in that space, here's where you recognize the conversation that you're capable of having, whatever that is, right? Not everybody has to be a master of all things. So I don't have to be an expert in topic A, and you don't have to be an expert in topic B. We can all come to the table where we are, right? So in that space, just recognize there's one rule that rules them all. And this is regard to racism, social norm, stereotype, or similar issue. Everyone deserves to live a life free of discrimination. Very simple. And in doing so, we have to recognize that we don't have to agree with individuals in order for them to still be able to live their life. And individuals don't have to agree with us for us to live our life. We have the ability to live alongside of one another, disagreeing, not liking, not on the same page, and still being able to move forward, wishing each other well. there's a line that has been drawn that just keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper, right? That separates us from recognizing that reality. We don't have to be enemies with each other because we find ourselves on opposite sides of a conversation. Matter of fact, I encourage you to be on the opposite side of a conversation because that's going to expand our conversation. And in that way, it allows me to grow closer to you and you to grow closer to me by the end of our conversation. And that's a beautiful thing most of the time. So when I think about, what's the conversations we should be having, again, all of them, we just have to have them in a way that allows the conversation to be had. And this is where we have to be forgiving in this conversation. You can't vilify people just because they don't agree with you, right? Like that doesn't help the conversation ever reach the point of resolution. It just stops us dead in track. It stops us in the tracks of emotion. When I have these conversations, what I normally tell people, and a great many people don't necessarily like it, but I say it anyway. Check your feelings at the door and then come in and let's have this conversation. And after we're done, you can pick up your feelings and go anywhere you want. It's not because your feelings are not important. It's not because you're not important. It's because your feelings will get in the way of us moving this conversation to the end. It'll stop the conversation from moving forward because your feelings are in the way. And your feelings have no place when we're trying to solve an issue, unless, of course, the issue is your feeling.
Sure.
So in that space, right, allow the conversations to be had. You can't avoid the emotion of a conversation, but you need to be able to check it, even partially, even momentarily, so you can move forward with the conversation. Once the conversation is had, though, and here is where we were just talking about action, right? Conversations are good, but action is gold. Mm-hmm. Right? It's a very simple understanding. And we must lean into action at every single turn. So no matter what we're talking about, legislative advocacy, a school issue down at one of your local schools, whether we're talking about local government ordinance, it makes no difference what we're talking about. Lean into the action at every turn. Do something. Conversation's only going to get us so far. It's going to help us understand the problem. It's going to help us identify a solution. But at the end of the day, if we don't move into the action of those things, nothing ever happens. And in that space, here is where, when you're talking about action now, the next portion is probably what stalls so many people from moving into action, right? You don't have to be special. You don't have to create something. You don't have to identify a new need. No wheels have to be invented in this space. Everything already exists. Makes no difference what you support, what your movement or motive is, what are the things that you want to get behind. That already exists somewhere. So here is where you have to be personally responsible to find those people and those organizations and those businesses that are already doing and supporting or whatever it is, right? To the thing you want, go help them expand that. Go help them amplify that. Go, whatever it is you want to do, go find the person or the organization that's already doing it. We don't have to invent any wheels in this space. Because in order to move towards racism, social norms, stereotype, moving towards ending those things, it's the action that gets us there. And it's that arc of justice. And we've heard it with Martin Luther King, right? Bending the arc of justice. That arc of justice will not bend on its own. It only bends when we demand that it does so. When we push and force it into those spaces, when we stop it from moving where we are and we push it into another direction. That's how the arc of justice bends. And we are responsible for that movement. So we have to lean into the action. And if we're recommending, what should people do more often and more openly, they should step into spaces of support and action in organization and community and spaces that need them. Domestic violence, decarceration, prison reform, police reform, whatever your issue is, right? Environmental justice. There are people and places already doing the good work. Go help them. This world doesn't get better because we're going to talk about it. It only gets better when we do about it. And that's the space that we all need to occupy.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Again,
Thank you.
thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't mind me. Sometimes I get serious about this stuff, but that's
No,
because it's my
it's
passion,
important.
right?
Yeah.
It's my passion, it's my joy, and I recognize. Listen, as much as we act that way, we don't own this world. We are just borrowing it until we have to give it back to younger generations.
Right.
And in that way, give a damn. Be responsible enough to give back something better than which you found. Make it your point. Don't just leave the problem for someone else. And there's been a little too much of that going on over one too many decades and generations. And at some point in time, that has to stop. And it only stops when we demand we move into action, when we stop supporting those things that don't support us, when we hold ourselves accountable and grow in our own personal development. That's the conversation we just had. That playbook that we're talking about, how to make things better, we just wrote it in our conversation today.
Absolutely. I fully agree and appreciate everything that you've said in our conversation because you say it with such clarity, like you're saying it, make it more simple. And that is what is needed as well. So many things are overcomplicated. No, I appreciate everything that you said. And you have a book out, and also you were mentioning a bill to me that you're working on. So can you describe a little bit about what you have currently going on, either one of those or both of those?
Sure. So I'll start in that bill space,
Yeah.
right? So one of the things that I've always leaned into, and especially as of late, has been legislative advocacy, right? It's one of the spaces when I think about activism where I like to lean into to create real, effective, lasting, tangible change. And when you're writing laws and amending laws, you are creating significant change for the millions of people that those laws affect. So we just finished passing a bill here in New York called Clean Slate, and it's all about sealing, right, the records of individuals who have satisfied their requirements, already did their time, have moved back into the population, into the community, and are now ready to get back to living their life, right? Close the chapter on one of the worst mistakes of their life so they could move on and forward. And what we found over the years is that so many of those people have never been able to move forward freely because they continue to be discriminated against. People see that they have an old record 20, 30 years ago, and they're still denied housing, denied employment, denied job. Just, it's unbelievable that these things still happen. So that Clean Slate Act, that bill, prevents people from discriminating against those people who have already satisfied their requirements. And we're talking about people who have satisfied their time, their post-supervision, any other type of requirement, and are ready to move back and become a member of society, right? Those individuals, that bill was just passed. We're also, that one is now in the governor's bill. That's going to be passed in the governor's budget here in New York. It's going to be passed next month. Now we're just seeing which version is going to be passed. We're hoping not too many carve-outs or changes are made to our original bill, but that one's passing. And then we have another one. It's a Community Not Cages campaign, and it deals with three particular bills. One, eliminate mandatory minimums, which is a relic of the old Rockefeller drug laws that arrested and incarcerated thousands of people here in New York unjustly and unfairly. Some of that is still on the books when we talk about sentencing, and we need to eliminate those remnants, right? So it eliminates that. It calls in, a second look act for those individuals who have already been tried and they already have a sentence. Well, let's take a look at those because not all of that was done fairly, right? Some of it was just excruciatingly painful. First time offense, 20 years. Like, my goodness,
Wow,
right?
yeah.
Let's look back at some of those things if and when it's appropriate. And then ultimately good time and, individuals, good time and earned time. We want to encourage people to heal and rehabilitate while they're inside. So when they come home and enter the community, they're positive members of our community. We want to encourage that. So when people are inside, let them have good time. It encourages them to act proper. It encourages them to be an excellent model for others that are inside. It encourages them to seek education and rehabilitative programs. So when they come home, they are that much better instead of worse. Let's support those kind of things. Let's create more opportunities to build our communities, and let's stop funding all of this human warehousing and caging. And in that space, those are two of the bills that I'm working on. I work on a bunch of them. We write these bills. We lobby elected officials in the Senate and in the Assembly. And then we educate the public, because at the end of the day, these are multi-year campaigns. People need to be made aware. Elected officials need to be educated. And then we can start to have the conversation about actively passing, changing, or amending a law. It's a long-term project, but all of these things are so worth it. Because like I said, these things affect the lives of millions of people as soon as they're passed. The moment they go into place, millions start to experience relief from what they were previously. And this is where, I spend a lot of time in that space, and we're working on a lot of those campaigns. Clean Slate is going to pass in April. Excellent. We've been working on it for the last few years.
Wonderful.
And the Communities Not Cages has gained a tremendous amount of support. We just launched that campaign in January, and we already have most of the Senate and a large number of the Assembly already supporting that bill, because it's just good common sense legislation. At the end of the day, can we lean on the side of fairness and equity? Is that too much to ask for?
Right. Yeah.
And in that space, when we have these conversations, people recognize, no, that's totally honest. It's totally fair. And why not punish individuals, even when they're doing the right thing, right?
Right.
It's in these moments where I meet resistance, and I always have to remind myself, to the overprivileged, equality feels like oppression, right? To the overprivileged, equality feels like oppression. Sometimes people will get offended that you are trying to create opportunity for others because they think it's taking away from themselves.
Right.
And again, we're not zero sum. There is enough for everybody out here. Why don't we start sharing and caring a little bit more and watch how that starts to play out? And that's the space that I occupy. So I've been doing a lot of work inside of there, and I'll continue to do work in there.
Yeah.
I also just recently wrote a book, Unjustified, Where Have Our Black Leaders Gone? And that also, it just dives into conversations that need to be had early and often, especially with young people. I feel as though when you have these conversations with young people, you take away a lot of the false narrative that they will grow into later on, and they will start to hear later on as they engage society, the world, television, and all the other good stuff. So in this way, Unjustified allows you to open the door to a couple of these conversations so that young people can learn how to navigate the world that they are about to enter. We want to make sure that they're seeing the problem, they can avoid the problem, and then they can find ways to eliminate that thing personally, directly, indirectly. Again, not supporting those things in people that don't support you. We talk about those things early and often because as a child, you are influenced all the time. You don't even have your own frame of mind just yet, even after you graduate high school. It's not until after you graduate high school that you're ever challenged to think on your own and for yourself. I encourage that to happen early. Do that early. You'll watch your children flourish. Yes, they are not going to agree with you often. Yes, they are going to talk back every once in a while because they have found a point in a conversation that's totally legitimate. But that's a good thing. Right? That is totally a good thing. And we should encourage that from our young people because that's going to create the best young person moving forward. And what happens when they start sharing those lessons with others? It just makes for a better world. It makes for a better environment. And that's what Unjustified is all about. Recognizing how we hurt ourselves as a community, how others have hurt us because it's legitimate. Systemic limitations do exist. But more importantly, how do we get past all of that to create better outcomes for our communities? That's the space in which I occupy. That's what I find my passion. I love it in those spaces, having those conversations, because again, thinking of how people can move forward in their life, how they can better their own life, how they can then share that with others and better their lives. This is where you get into the conversation of generational change. And that's the change that will last and endure and close the gaps and the bridges that currently exist. Like we spoke about earlier, the generational wealth gap, we referenced it earlier. That's one of those things. If you're having those conversations early with children, they know how to combat it and they'll do their part in closing it. So they're closing it from bottom up. And I'm speaking with a lot of elders and older individuals, closing that gap top down. And before you know it, you get to a point where these two dynamics reach each other, or at the very least, close the gap. At the very least. And that's the space in which I like to occupy. And I currently find my passion.
Wow, that's wonderful. I read up a little bit about your book and look forward to getting a copy or two to share.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This whole conversation, I feel like I'm going to return to for some grounding information when I need it. Because it's like I know you are speaking to me, but you are speaking to everybody, but it feels like you're speaking directly only to me.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
One more question for you before I let you go. I'm keeping you a little long, but
no, this is an outstanding conversation. We're talking about some good stuff here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. If somebody is interested in, so say I wanted to try to get involved in writing bills or having my voice heard in that realm or trying to push things forward, what's a small way that somebody could start to figure out how to get involved in that?
Nice. So I love this question above all others, right? Because again, I always lean back to simplicity. And this is true for everything. Everything and anything is one Google search away.
Yes.
Right? Like that is the truth. So no matter what it is you're into, you will be able to find local organizations who are already doing that, right? And in that space, you can then support them. You can join them. You can amplify their voice. Maybe your skill set can amplify what it is they're doing. Maybe your voice, you can lend your voice to these groups so that you can help amplify their message. There are so many ways to get involved. And just like we were talking about earlier, you're not creating any wheels here. Everything already exists, whether we're talking about writing bills or doing something else, all of that already exists. Find your local organization that's doing it and then perform your due diligence. Just like with anything else, take the time to learn. What does it look like? What does it sound like? Where might you be a good fit? Kind of sit back and play that fly on a wall role, right? And for me, this is how I generally operate. I like to sit back and observe before I do anything, right? The last thing I do is the action. The very last thing. At first, it's like the old adage, measure twice, cut once. I will sit there and listen and observe and watch and show up at the next panel meeting, town board meeting, Zoom meeting, whatever it is, right? I'll show up and just listen and observe. I'll hear the language. I'll hear the messaging. I'll see the direction. I'll understand the motives. And then I can engage these individuals and say, hey, I would like to help. This is what I do, my specialty. This is how I can help you. I've had a chance to watch you for a while. I now see what you're doing and I can see how I can help or amplify. And in that space, I'm now ready to engage and speak with you. And maybe you now can start to tell me or show me what you're working on or where you could utilize me to help expand or amplify this message. I would tell people to start in those spaces first and foremost, right? Perform your due diligence. And again, whatever you're looking to do already exists. You're not creating anything at all that isn't already under the sun. Go find those places and support them. It will make the best use of your time and energy, and you will be able to create the biggest impact in that space because you're moving something that already has momentum. And you're not trying to build something from scratch. And I think that's probably the best advice for anyone looking to get into activism of any kind.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Very helpful. Is there I know we chatted about all kinds of things, but is there anything else that you would like to mention or want to highlight or anything before we wrap up today?
Other than just a fantastic afternoon, kind of hanging out with a friend, having a great conversation. Just wanted to thank you for that and providing the opportunity. And I would be remiss, as my team always tells me, let people know where to find you, Gahrey. You continue to give and you always forget to ask in return, right? And I say, you know what? You're right. It's just like when I think of my shortcomings, that's it. I usually show up, I give a ton, and then before you even have a chance to turn around and say thank you, I'm gone.
Right.
It's like, I do it all the time. Mm-hmm. So please find me, GahreyOvalle.com. Check me out at Gahrey Ovalle in all of the social media spaces. And the book itself, you can find on Amazon, Unjustified, Where Have Our Black Leaders Gone? Please purchase it, support it, have those conversations with yourself, with loved ones, with a friend. At the end of the day, we have to start having better conversations so we can move into the action of those conversations. And what we need to do is just simplify that and get into the work of it. So I just wanted to share how to, get in touch with me, how to reach out. I think that's probably the best at this point.
Yeah, perfect. And we'll share all that in the show notes so people can just do one little click wherever they're listening from, and just everybody can connect. And I really appreciate this conversation today and you joining me. I am going to be re-listening to this multiple times. So I appreciate it a lot. And if there's anything that we can do to support you further, just let me know. So
that is awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I hope to connect with you again very soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us for Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with someone you know. Connect with us on social media. We would love to hear from you. We are at Take Notice Podcast. You can also find us at takenoticepodcast.org. Reviews help us reach more listeners, so please rate and review on your favorite podcast app. Take Notice, Amplifying Black Stories is produced, hosted, and edited by Allison Preisinger Higgins. Music by Version Big 5 featuring Darius Higgins. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for taking notice.